My husband Arthur had a saying he used for everything from choosing a stock to planting a tree in our yard. He'd squint, rub the back of his neck, and say, "Maxine, you don't build something to last by chasing the wind." For 42 years, I'd watched him live by that creed. He built a life for us, an estate, not on risky bets and flashy trends, but on slow, steady, deliberate growth. It was a legacy of patience, and after he passed, I intended to honor that. My son Oscar, however, had always been a chaser of the wind. It's funny how grief can sharpen your hearing. In the months after Arthur's funeral, every word from my son seemed to have a new, metallic edge to it. The gentle check-ins became interrogations disguised as concern. "Mom, are you sure you're keeping up with the portfolio?" He'd ask, his voice dripping with a kind of practiced, filial piety that always felt one size too small for him. "The market is volatile. You can't just let it sit there. Let it sit there." As if Arthur's life's work was a forgotten pot of soup on the back of the stove, I would just smile and say, "It's doing just fine, dear. Your father knew what he was doing." But that was never the right answer for Oscar. For him, fine was an insult. It was a synonym for stagnant. The betrayal didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a cloud of expensive cologne and the squeak of hand-stitched leather shoes on my hardwood floors. Oscar had called that morning, his voice syrupy with false enthusiasm. "Mom, I've got someone I want you to meet. A real wizard. He's going to help us. Well, he's going to help you maximize the potential of Dad's estate." Maximize potential. It was a phrase that sounded like it had been focus grouped by sharks. When I opened the door, Oscar was standing there, beaming, with a man who was all teeth and tailoring. He was young, maybe 35, with hair so perfectly coiffed, it looked like it had been sculpted from dark chocolate. "Mom, this is Trent Carmichael," Oscar announced, ushering him inside as if he owned the place. "Trent, my mother Maxine." Trent took my hand. His grip was firm, dry, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a handshake that had practiced itself in front of a mirror. "A pleasure, Maxine," he said, his eyes not looking at me, but around me, cataloging the art on the walls, the comfortable but not ostentatious furniture, the quiet evidence of a life well lived. I could almost see the dollar signs clicking behind his pupils. He wasn't seeing a home, he was seeing a collection of assets. They sat on Arthur's favorite sofa, the one I still couldn't bring myself to change. Oscar did most of the talking at first, a babbling preamble about how much he worried about me, how he just wanted to make sure I was secure. It was a performance, and a clumsy one at that. Then, with a flourish, he ceded the floor to the wizard. Trent leaned forward, a tablet in his hands. "Maxine," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "Oscar has conveyed to me your traditionalist approach to asset management, and I respect that. I truly do, but the financial landscape has changed. Holding on to these low-yield bonds and blue-chip stocks, it's like keeping a racehorse locked in a stable." He swiped through charts and graphs, a blizzard of acronyms and percentages. He spoke of aggressive growth funds, crypto diversification, and leveraged derivatives. The words meant little to me, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the condescending patter of a man who assumes the person he's talking to is a simpleton. He was explaining rocket science to a kindergartner. "What we propose," he said, his smile widening, "is a strategic liquidation of the legacy portfolio. We'll move the capital into a more dynamic, responsive structure that can generate real returns. We're talking 20, maybe 25% annually." I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. Strategic liquidation. He wanted to dismantle my husband's life's work. He wanted to take the sturdy, reliable oak trees Arthur had planted and mulch them to fertilize a few flashy, fast-growing weeds. I looked at my son. Oscar was nodding along, his face a mask of rapt admiration. He was completely captivated by the snake oil salesman. "Trent," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "my husband built that portfolio to be stable. It provides more than enough income for my needs. It was meant to last." Trent chuckled. It was a soft, dismissive sound. Of course, of course. But we're not just talking about your needs, Maxine. We're talking about potential. We're talking about Oscar's future, about your grandchildren's future. We're talking about building a dynasty. And there it was. The truth, stripped bare. This wasn't about my security. It was about Oscar getting his hands on the money, and getting his hands on it now. He saw his father's estate not as a legacy, but as a launch pad for his own ambitions, and I was just the inconvenient gatekeeper. He hadn't hired a wizard. He'd hired a crowbar. I stood up. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Carmichael. I'll think about it." Oscar's face fell. He looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. This is a no-brainer. Trent is the best." "Nevertheless," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument, "I will think about it." I walked them to the door, the silence in the hallway thick with my son's disappointment and Trent's smug certainty. The moment the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, the solid wood a poor substitute for the spine I suddenly felt was turning to jelly. The smell of his cologne lingered in the air, a cloying, invasive scent that felt like a violation. That was the moment I understood. My son hadn't just brought a stranger into my home. He had brought an enemy. The silence of the house after they left was a crushing weight. I walked through the rooms, tracing the outlines of furniture with my fingertips, my feet silent on the worn oriental rugs. Every object, every photograph, was a testament to a life built on trust and mutual respect. Arthur and I, we were partners. He handled the broad strokes of our finances, yes, but he never made a single significant decision without me. He'd spread the papers out on the dining room table, explain the pros and cons, and we would talk until we were both comfortable. He valued my intuition as much as he valued his own research. And now my own son had treated me like a child, a doddering old woman who needed to be managed. I sank into my armchair, the one opposite Arthur's, and the dam of my composure finally broke. It wasn't a loud theatrical sobbing. It was a quiet, ragged weeping that shook my whole body. I cried for Arthur. I cried for the life we'd built. But mostly, I cried for the chasm that had just opened up between me and my only child. The betrayal was so profound, so dismissive, it felt like he had tried to erase the last 42 years of my life, to negate my role as his father's partner, and reduce me to a mere custodian of his inheritance. He didn't see me, Maxine. He saw a balance sheet, and he'd decided it was underperforming. My mind started to drift back, sorting through memories like old photographs, looking for the origin of this callousness in him. I remembered Arthur trying to teach a teenage Oscar about the stock market. We were in Arthur's study, the room smelling of old books and pipe tobacco. Arthur had a patient, methodical way of explaining things. He was trying to impart his philosophy of long-term value. "You see, Oscar," he'd said, pointing to a stock chart, "you don't buy the company, you buy the business. You look at the foundation, the leadership, the product. Is it built to last?" Oscar had been fidgety, bored. He'd picked up a financial magazine from the desk, one with a flashy headline about a tech startup that had tripled in value overnight. "Dad, this is so slow," he'd complained. "This guy here made millions in 6 months. Why are we bothering with these old dinosaur companies?" Arthur had looked at him, a deep sadness in his eyes that I recognized even then. Because, son, he'd said softly, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. What that man made is money. What we're building is wealth. They are not the same thing. Oscar had just shrugged, tossing the magazine aside. He didn't get it. He never did. He was always drawn to the bright, flashy flame, and his choice in partners reflected that. My mind unwillingly went to Julia, his first wife. Julia was, well, Julia was brilliant, a CPA with a mind like a steel trap, but a quiet, unassuming demeanor that many people, including Oscar, mistook for a lack of ambition. Arthur had adored her. He saw a kindred spirit in her. I remembered a dinner we'd had, not long after they were married. Arthur and Julia had spent 2 hours debating the intricacies of a new tax law, their faces alive with intellectual energy. Oscar had sat there, scrolling through his phone, looking utterly lost and annoyed. Later that night, Arthur had said to me, "That woman, Maxine, she understands the bones of a business, not just the skin. Oscar is a lucky, lucky man. I hope he knows it." He didn't. A few years later, he met Tiffany at a fundraiser. She was a part-time model, an aspiring influencer, a woman whose entire existence seemed to be curated for social media. She was all skin, no bones. Oscar was smitten. The divorce was brutal, not because Julia made it so, but because Oscar did. He was cruel, dismissive, trying to paint her as bitter and grasping, when all she did was stand her ground, with a quiet dignity that infuriated him. She never fought for a penny more than the law stipulated. She walked away, head held high, and rebuilt her life from the ground up, while Oscar and Tiffany began their loud, ostentatious life, funded largely by a generous loan from Arthur that we both knew would never be repaid. After the divorce, I'd kept in touch with Julia, a Christmas card, a birthday email. It was a quiet, slender thread of connection, one I kept because I genuinely liked and respected her. I knew Oscar wouldn't approve, but I didn't care. It felt like a small act of loyalty, not just to Julia, but to Arthur's good judgment. A sharp ping from my laptop jolted me back to the present. An email. It was from Oscar. The subject line was chillingly simple. "For your signature." I clicked it open, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. There was a short, condescending message. "Mom, here's the paperwork Trent and I talked about. It's just a standard limited power of attorney. It will allow Trent to execute the new strategy for us without having to bother you with every little transaction. Please sign it, scan it, and send it back by the end of the day. Trent wants to get the ball rolling. For us," he had written, "for us." I downloaded the attachment. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the intent was crystal clear. It was a document of abdication. By signing it, I would be handing over complete discretionary control of Arthur's entire estate to Trent Carmichael, a man I'd known for less than 2 hours. I would have no say, no oversight. I would be a passenger in my own life. I stared at the screen, at the blinking cursor, at the casual tyranny of his request. The grief that had been a heavy, sodden blanket over me began to burn away, replaced by something else, something hot and sharp and clear. It was rage, a cold, clarifying rage. He hadn't just insulted my intelligence. He had tried to strip me of my agency. He had assumed I would just roll over, the sweet, sad little widow, and sign away my life to his chosen wizard. That was the catalyst. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet. The thought of my son and his smirking puppet master, dismantling Arthur's legacy, piece by piece, while I sat by powerless, it was unacceptable. It was unthinkable. I thought of Arthur's words. You don't build something to last by chasing the wind. Well, a storm was coming, and Oscar was chasing it with open arms. It was my duty to protect what Arthur had built. It was my duty to protect myself. And in that moment of cold fury, a name surfaced in my mind, a beacon of quiet competence and steely integrity. Julia. It's a funny thing, resolve. It feels a lot like coming home to yourself after a long time away. The tears were gone, replaced by a stillness I hadn't felt in months. I closed the laptop, the unsigned POA sitting in my downloads folder like a coiled snake. I would not be signing it. I would not be scanning it. I would be deleting it. My son wanted to get the ball rolling. Fine. I would roll a ball of my own, and he would never see it coming. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet, anyway. At that moment, it was about survival. But the line between survival and revenge, I was beginning to learn, can be very thin indeed. It was time to find an ally. It was time to call my former daughter-in-law. The first step was the hardest, not because I was afraid, but because I had to be so careful. I felt like I was moving through my own life as a spy. I couldn't use my home computer. Oscar was far too tech-savvy and had in the past helped me set it up, which I now realized meant he probably had access I didn't even know about. I went to the public library the next day, a place I hadn't been in years, and sat at a generic, anonymous computer terminal. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a comforting analog scent. I typed Julia Albright, CPA, into the search bar. The results were immediate and impressive. She hadn't just rebuilt her career, she had constructed an empire of competence. Albright and Associates, LLP, ethical accounting for a new generation. Her website was clean, professional, and serious. There were testimonials from nonprofits, small business owners, and even a few arts endowments. They all praised her meticulous work, her unwavering integrity, and her strategic mind. One client wrote, Julia Albright doesn't just do your books, she understands your mission. Mission, the word resonated deep within me. My mission, I realized, was to protect Arthur's legacy. I wasn't just a widow with a portfolio. I was the steward of a philosophy. I found the contact page and stared at the phone number. Calling her felt like crossing a Rubicon. It was an admission that my own family had failed me, that I needed to seek help from an outsider my son had created. I took a deep breath, copied the number down on a slip of paper from my purse, and left the library. I bought a cheap prepaid burner phone at a corner drugstore, paying in cash. It felt illicit and thrilling. Standing on a busy street corner, surrounded by the noise of the city, I dialed her number. Her assistant answered, professional and brisk. I gave my name, Maxine Holloway, and there was a fractional pause, a flicker of recognition, or was I imagining it? I simply said, I'm an old acquaintance of Miss Albright's. I have a personal financial matter I'd like to discuss with her. I was put on hold. The music was some bland instrumental jazz. Each second felt like an hour. I was sure she would refuse. Why would she want to get involved with the messy Holloway family again? Then her voice came on the line. It was just as I remembered it. Calm, clear, and intelligent. Maxine, is everything all right? The genuine concern in her voice almost undid me. I'm fine, Julia. I was hoping I could buy you a cup of coffee. There's something I need your advice on. Of course, she said, without a moment's hesitation. How about tomorrow morning? There's a quiet place near my office. We met at a small, independent coffee shop, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. It was a world away from the sterile corporate environment. Trent Carmichael inhabited. Julia was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. She looked older, of course, but the years had been kind. They had etched a new confidence around her eyes, a self-possession she hadn't had when she was with Oscar. She wore a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. She looked powerful. "Maxine," she said, standing to give me a brief, warm hug. "It's so good to see you. You too, Julia. You look wonderful." "I'm happy," she said, and I knew it was the simple, unadorned truth. I didn't waste time. As we sipped our coffees, I laid it all out. I told her about Oscar's concern, about the arrival of Trent Carmichael, the condescending presentation, the talk of strategic liquidations and leveraged derivatives. I told her about the power of attorney he'd emailed me. I watched her face as I spoke. She didn't interrupt, she just listened, her expression transitioning from neutral professionalism to a kind of focused, analytical stillness. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, seemed to be processing every word, every nuance. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, stirring her cappuccino with a small spoon. "The man's name was Trent Carmichael," she asked finally. I nodded. "Yes, do you know him?" A small, wry smile touched her lips. "I know of him. His firm has a reputation. They're called vulture capitalists by the more polite members of my profession. They specialize in finding undervalued, cash-rich estates held by, let's just say, less sophisticated owners. They leverage them to the hilt for short-term gains, collect massive fees, and move on before the whole thing collapses." She looked me directly in the eye. "You were right not to sign that POA, Maxine. It would have been a catastrophe." Hearing her validate my instincts was like a balm on a raw wound. "So what do I do, Julia? Oscar won't let this go. He's convinced this man is a genius." "He's not a genius," she said flatly. "He's a predator. And Oscar has always been susceptible to a good sales pitch." It was the closest she came to criticizing him, and it was devastatingly accurate. Then I played my hidden card. From my purse, I took out a long, sealed envelope. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed. "Arthur left this for me," I said, sliding it across the table. "It's not part of the will. The will is simple. Everything to me. No conditions. This is what his lawyer called a letter of wishes. It's not legally binding, but it's his voice." Julia picked it up, handling it with a reverence that touched me. She opened it carefully and began to read. The letter was Arthur, through and through. It was filled with his hopes for the money. He wanted to fund a scholarship at the local community college. He wanted to support the small, struggling art museum downtown. He wanted to ensure the public library had a budget for new children's books. It was a roadmap for philanthropy, a blueprint for turning wealth into community good. It was everything that Trent Carmichael's plan was not. Oscar had never seen this letter. I'd never shown it to him because I knew he would see it not as a sacred duty, but as an obstacle. Julia read it twice. When she looked up, her eyes were shining. "Maxine, this is beautiful. This is his legacy." "I know," I whispered. "And Oscar and Trent want to turn it into cryptocurrency." Julia leaned back, a thoughtful, calculating look on her face. The CPA was at work now. The gears were turning. A power of attorney isn't the only legal instrument that can manage assets, she said slowly. There are other structures, more robust structures, structures designed for protection and purpose. "What are you thinking?" I asked, leaning forward. "I'm thinking of a foundation," she said, "the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation. You create a private family foundation and endow it with the estate's assets, every stock, every bond, every piece of real estate. you transfer them from Maxine Holloway's to the foundation. Once they're in there, they are legally owned by the foundation, not by you. They can only be used to serve the foundation's stated mission, and the mission would be, she tapped the letter. This would be the mission. The bylaws of the foundation would be built around Arthur's wishes. The assets would be firewalled, protected. Trent Carmichael wouldn't be able to touch them. Oscar wouldn't be able to touch them. They could only be used for the philanthropic goals you set out. It was brilliant. It was elegant. It was a fortress, a quiet, unassuming fortress, built of paperwork and purpose. It was a plan Arthur would have loved, but then a thought struck me, a potential weakness in the wall. But who would manage it? Who would make the financial decisions? If I'm in charge, Oscar will just badger me endlessly. He'll try to have me declared incompetent. Julia nodded. That's the key. You would be the founder and the sole member of the board of directors. Your job is to set the vision, but you would need to appoint an executive officer, a chief financial officer, someone with the legal and financial authority to manage the day-to-day operations and execute the investment strategy, a conservative strategy designed for preservation and modest growth in line with the foundation's mission. I looked at her, at this brilliant, capable woman who my son had thrown away, this woman who Arthur had admired so deeply. The final piece of the plan clicked into place in my mind, so perfect, so just, it was almost poetic. I don't just want your advice, Julia, I said, my voice steady. I want to hire you. She looked surprised. Maxine, I have my own firm. I can consult, of course. I can help you find the right people. No, I said, cutting her off gently, not as a consultant. I want you to run it. I'm creating the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation, and I want you to be its chief financial officer and executive director. You will have full, independent operational control over the assets. You will answer to the board, which is me, but the financial stewardship will be yours and yours alone. She was stunned into silence. I could see the conflict in her eyes. It was a huge undertaking. It meant stepping back into my family's orbit, a place that held painful memories for her. I knew I had to make it an offer she couldn't refuse. I had to make it about more than just duty. I know what I'm asking, I continued, my voice low and earnest. I know it's a lot, but Arthur respected you more than any other financial professional he ever met. He would have wanted this, and you would not be doing it as a favor. I reached into my purse again and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout from my library research, a salary survey for executives at private foundations of a similar size to what ours would be. I had circled the number at the 90th percentile. Your starting salary, I said, pushing the paper towards her, will be this, plus benefits, a car allowance, and a performance bonus tied to the foundation's philanthropic goals, not market speculation. Julia's eyes flickered down to the number. I saw them widen, just for a second. It was a substantial figure. It was a number that represented not just compensation, but respect. It was a number designed to make my son's eyes water. She looked up from the paper, not at the number, but at me. I saw a dozen emotions cross her face: shock, hesitation, a flicker of old pain, and then something new, a spark of determination, a glint of steel. It was the look of a woman who had been underestimated her whole life and was finally being offered a chance to wield her full power on her own terms for a cause she believed in. It wasn't just Oscar who underestimated you, Julia, I said softly. The whole world did. This is your chance to build something that lasts. She took a slow, deep breath. When do we start? She asked. The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in quiet efficiency, while Oscar was busy sending me increasingly agitated texts. Mom, seriously, what's the holdup? Trent has his team on standby. Julia and I were assembling our own team. She brought in a lawyer she trusted, a quiet, older man named Mr. Abernethy, who specialized in estate law and nonprofits. He had a reassuringly calm demeanor and an encyclopedic knowledge of the tax code. We met in a sterile, anonymous conference room in Mr. Abernethy's downtown office. The three of us huddled over documents, building our fortress brick by brick. First, the Articles of Incorporation for the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation. The mission statement was lifted almost verbatim from Arthur's letter of wishes. It was ironclad. Then, the bylaws. This was Julia's masterstroke. I was appointed as the sole lifetime member of the board of directors. This gave me ultimate oversight, but the bylaws vested all day-to-day executive power and, crucially, all signatory authority on financial accounts in the office of the chief financial officer. The CFO could not be dismissed without a unanimous vote of the board, which meant essentially that only I could fire her. Abernethy filed the incorporation papers with the state. Julia and I began the colossal task of the asset transfer. It was a silent, methodical takeover. We opened a new set of brokerage and bank accounts under the foundation's name and federal tax ID number. Then, one by one, we began moving every single asset, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, the titles to 2 small commercial properties Arthur had invested in decades ago. Everything was legally transferred from me to the foundation. It was a mountain of paperwork, a dizzying series of forms and signatures. Each signature felt like a small act of rebellion. During this time, I maintained a placid, slightly dithery facade for Oscar. When he'd call, I'd let the phone ring a few times before answering, as if I'd been napping. "Oh, hello, dear," I'd say, my voice soft. "Mom, the papers, did you sign them?" "Oh, the papers. Yes, I'm still looking them over, Oscar. There's so much fine print, you know. An old woman has to be careful." "Mom, you don't need to read the fine print. That's what Trent is for. He's a professional." "I'm sure he is, dear. I just want to be thorough." "Your father was always so thorough." I could hear the frustration tightening his voice. He thought he was dealing with senile hesitation, with an old woman's stubbornness. He had no idea he was dealing with a coordinated, strategic campaign. He was looking for a chess piece on the board, but I had quietly moved the entire board to a different room. The first sign that our plan was working came from Julia. She called me on my burner phone one afternoon. "It's starting," she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "What's happening?" I asked, my heart giving a little flutter. Trent Carmichael's office just tried to run a third-party data query on the portfolio. They were trying to get a snapshot of the assets they're planning to manage. The system kicked them out. Everything is flagging as account holder mismatchers or ownership transferred. A slow smile spread across my face. "So they know something's up." "They know something's up," she confirmed. "But they don't know what. Get ready. The calls are about to get more frantic." She was right. The next morning, my personal cell phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message popped up. It was from Trent Carmichael. His voice, once so smooth and oily, now had a sharp, irritated edge. "Maxine, Trent Carmichael here. I seem to be running into some administrative hurdles trying to get your new account set up. My system is showing that the assets are no longer held in your name. I'm sure it's just a clerical error on the bank's end, but could you give me a call as soon as possible to clear this up? We're eager to get started." Clerical error. I almost laughed out loud. Later that day, Oscar called. He was apoplectic. "Mom, what did you do?" he yelled, foregoing any pretense of gentle concern. "Trent just called me. He said the money is gone. All of it. Where is it?" I took a deep breath, channeling my inner calm. "Don't be silly, Oscar. It's not gone. It's perfectly safe. It's being managed." "Managed by who?" he demanded. "You were supposed to sign the papers for Trent." I decided to go in a different direction. I said simply, "What different direction? Who are you talking to? Did you give it to some other broker?" "Who?" He was firing questions like a machine gun. "It's being handled by a professional. I'm very comfortable with the new arrangement." "Well, I'm not comfortable," he shouted. "This is my inheritance we're talking about. My future. You have no right to move it without talking to me." His inheritance. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and grasping. It was never about my security. It was never about honoring his father. It was only ever about what he believed he was owed. "Actually, Oscar," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water, "your father left his estate to me, to me. It is my right to do with it as I see fit. And I have. The matter is settled. This isn't over, Mom," he seethed. "This is not over." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, my heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. The silent takeover was complete. The panic was just beginning. The fallout was immediate and predictable. Oscar, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, simply could not process the fact that he had been outmaneuvered. His first move was a clumsy attempt at legal intimidation. A letter arrived from a high-powered law firm I'd never heard of. It was thick with threatening jargon, alluding to my fiduciary duty to the estate's heir apparent, and strongly suggesting that my recent financial activities indicated a diminished mental capacity that might require judicial intervention. It was a thinly veiled threat to have me declared incompetent. I didn't even flinch. I simply forwarded a scanned copy to Mr. Abernathy. 2 days later, Oscar's lawyers received a response. It was a crisp, polite, and utterly devastating letter, accompanied by a full cognitive and neurological assessment of me, conducted just 1 week prior by the head of neurology at the city's top hospital. Julia, with her characteristic foresight, had insisted I get one the moment we decided on our plan. The report was glowing, describing my cognitive function as exceptionally sharp and in the superior range for her age. Mr. Abernathy's letter concluded by politely suggesting that any further baseless accusations regarding my mental state would be met with a vigorous lawsuit for defamation and elder abuse. The legal threats stopped. The emotional blackmail began. Oscar's wife, Tiffany, called me, her voice a high-pitched whine of weaponized distress. "Maxine, I don't know what you've done, but you're tearing this family apart. Oscar is a wreck. We had plans, Maxine. We were going to remodel the kitchen. The children's private school tuition is due. How could you be so selfish?" The sheer, breathtaking entitlement of it left me speechless for a moment. They had been spending money they didn't have, based on the assumption that my husband's legacy was their personal slush fund. "Tiffany," I said calmly, "your household finances are your and Oscar's responsibility. They have nothing to do with me." I hung up the phone before she could start crying, which I knew was her next move. Then came the ambush. On a Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Oscar, Tiffany, and my 2 grandchildren, 8-year-old Leo and 10-year-old Clara, standing on my porch. Oscar was holding a box of my favorite pastries. It was a transparently manipulative tactic, using my grandchildren as human shields. "Hi, Mom," Oscar said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." I loved my grandchildren dearly, and seeing them was a painful twist of the knife. But I knew this wasn't a social call. It was a siege. I let them in, my heart aching. Clara and Leo ran to hug me, and for a moment I almost faltered. This was what he was holding over me, access to them. While the children went to the living room to watch cartoons, the three of us stood in the kitchen. Oscar started in, his voice low and conspiratorial. Mom, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was just trying to help. This whole thing has been a big misunderstanding. Whatever you've done, we can undo it. Just tell me who you've been talking to. We can fire them and get back on track with Trent. I just looked at him. The arrogance, the absolute refusal to believe he could be wrong. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here to reassert control. There's nothing to undo, Oscar, I said. The arrangements are permanent. His face hardened. So that's it? You're just cutting me out? Your own son? This was never about cutting you out, Oscar. This was about protecting your father's legacy. Protecting it? He scoffed. You've hidden it away. You've locked it up where it can't do anyone any good. What about your family? What about us? The family exodus he was experiencing wasn't a physical one. No one was leaving town. It was an exodus of status. Oscar and Tiffany had built their social lives on the promise of future wealth. They were the couple with the major inheritance coming. They hosted lavish parties, took extravagant vacations, all on credit, with the unspoken assumption that the Holloway estate would cover the bills. Now that foundation was gone. I'd heard through the grapevine that they had to withdraw their bid on a ridiculously ostentatious beach house. Tiffany had apparently thrown a tantrum at a country club luncheon when her card was declined. The whispers were starting. The power they thought they had was evaporating because it had never been theirs in the first place. It was a mirage, and I had turned off the projector. His final desperate move was to try and rally the extended family. He called my brother-in-law, Robert, a decent but notoriously spineless man. Robert called me, clearly uncomfortable. Maxine, he began. Oscar is well. He's very upset. He seems to think you've done something rash with Arthur's money. Robert, I said, my voice patient, I have established a charitable foundation in Arthur's name. Its mission is to fund scholarships and support local arts programs, things Arthur cared deeply about. The assets are being managed by a top-tier professional to ensure they last for generations to come, for the good of the community. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Oh, he said, a charity. Well, that sounds very noble, Maxine. I could hear the gears turning in his head. How could he possibly argue against that? How could Oscar? By trying to stop me, they wouldn't look like concerned family members. They would look like greedy, selfish monsters trying to steal from a charity named after their own father. I hadn't just built a financial fortress. I had built a moral one, and it was impregnable. The narrative was no longer his to control. It was mine. Oscar demanded one last meeting. He insisted on it. Face to face, Mom. No lawyers, no phone calls. You owe me that. I agreed, but on my terms. Not at my house, which he still saw as his territory. Not at a neutral location. I told him to meet me at a specific address downtown at 10 a.m. on a Friday. It was the new leased office space for the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation. It was modest, a small suite on the third floor of a respectable but not extravagant building, but it was ours. He arrived with Trent Carmichael in tow. I had expected as much. They came in spoiling for a fight, their faces set in grim, determined lines. They probably expected to find me alone, to intimidate me, to wear me down. They did not expect to be greeted by Julia. She met them at the door to our suite. She was standing in the small, elegant reception area, in front of a simple, tasteful wall plaque that read the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation. She wore a crisp, dark gray suit, and she looked completely, unshakably in command. Oscar stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth literally fell open. He looked from Julia to the plaque, and back to Julia, the gears of his mind grinding as he tried to process what he was seeing. Trent just looked confused, an arrogant frown on his face. Julia, Oscar stammered. What are you doing here? Hello, Oscar, Trent, Julia said, her voice perfectly level, coolly professional. Welcome to my office. Please, come in. She led them into the main conference room. I was sitting at the head of the large mahogany table, a pot of fresh coffee, and a stack of folders in front of me. The room was bright, with a large window overlooking the city. It smelled of new paint and limitless potential. Oscar stared at me, then at Julia, who had taken a seat to my right. Mom, what is this? What is she doing here? Oscar, Trent, I said calmly. I'd like you to meet the Chief Financial Officer and Executive Director of the Arthur P. Holloway Foundation, Julia Albright. She's the professional I've engaged to manage your father's estate. The color drained from Oscar's face. He looked as if he'd been slapped. He finally understood. This wasn't a random broker I'd found in the phone book. This was a calculated, strategic move of breathtaking precision. He looked at Julia, really looked at her, and saw not the woman he'd discarded, but a formidable opponent who held all the cards. As if on cue, Julia slid a slim binder across the table toward them. It was the Foundation's annual report, the first of many. On the cover page was the organizational chart. My name was at the top, under Board of Directors. Her name was right below, under Executive Director, CFO, and below that was a line item that I had specifically asked her to include, Executive Compensation Schedule. Trent, ever the numbers man, picked it up first. His eyes scanned the page, and then they widened. He nudged Oscar, who leaned over to look. I watched my son's eyes find the number, the salary I had authorized for Julia. It was a CEO's salary, a salary that dwarfed whatever commissions Trent had been hoping to skim. It was a salary that screamed competence, value, and respect. It was a salary I knew that would make his eyes water with rage and envy. I saw his jaw clench, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. You did this to spite me, he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. You gave my money, my inheritance, to her. It was never your money, Oscar, I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. It was your father's, and it is now the Foundation's, and this is what your father would have wanted. He always admired Julia's mind. He knew she understood value, not just price, something you never learned. Trent, seeing his payday evaporate before his very eyes, finally spoke up. This is outrageous, he blustered. You can't just lock up millions of dollars in some pet project. There are legal challenges. There are ways. Julia cut him off, her voice like a shard of ice. Mr. Carmichael, every P's been dotted, and every P's been crossed by one of the most respected estate lawyers in this state. The Foundation is an irrevocable trust. The assets are legally firewalled. The bylaws are airtight. There is nothing to challenge. Your services and your opinions are not required. Thank you for coming. It was a master class in dismissal. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get emotional. She simply stated the facts, and in doing so erased him from the equation. Oscar turned on Julia then, his face contorted with a vicious, ugly fury. You planned this, he spat. You were always jealous. You couldn't wait to get your claws into my family's money. Julia looked at him, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. Your father's money is being used to send underprivileged kids to college, Oscar, she said softly. It's buying art supplies for public schools. It's funding a free legal clinic for the elderly. If that's what you think my claws are doing, then I'll wear the accusation as a badge of honor. Now I have a meeting with a grant applicant in 5 minutes. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. They were defeated, utterly and completely. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to threaten. They had walked in like hunters and were leaving like ghosts. As they turned and walked out of the conference room, their shoulders slumped. I felt not a surge of triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. The house that Arthur built was safe. In the end, it was all very quiet. There were no more angry phone calls, no more threatening letters. There was just silence. Oscar and I don't speak anymore. I send birthday cards and Christmas presents to my grandchildren, and I receive polite, sterile thank you notes, probably dictated by Tiffany. I heard from my brother-in-law that Oscar had to sell his oversized house and that Tiffany is now working as a brand ambassador for a diet tea company on social media. Their world, built on the shifting sands of expectation, had collapsed under the weight of reality. I take no joy in that. But I take no blame, either. Their choices were their own. My life, on the other hand, has blossomed in ways I never expected. The foundation is my purpose now. Julia and I make a formidable team. She handles the intricate financial strategies, growing the principal with the same steady, intelligent care that Arthur would have, while I handle the heart of it. I read the grant applications. I meet the young students who are the first in their families to go to college, their faces shining with a hope that is so pure, it almost hurts to look at. I visit the community arts center and see children splattered with paint, creating things of beauty with supplies our foundation bought. Last week, we awarded a significant grant to a program that provides therapy dogs to residents in nursing homes. Julia and I went to visit the facility to see the program in action. I sat on a sofa in a sunny common room, a warm, fluffy golden retriever resting its head in my lap, and I watched Julia across the room. She was talking to the program director, a notebook in her hand, but she was smiling. It was a genuine, unguarded smile of deep personal satisfaction. She wasn't just a brilliant CPA anymore. She was a force for good. She had found a mission that was worthy of her mind and her heart. In saving Arthur's legacy, I'd like to think I helped her find a new one of her own. It's funny, when this all began, with Oscar and Trent and their talk of maximizing potential, I felt so small, so old, so powerless. I felt like my life was over, and I was just a custodian of the past. But they were the ones who were stuck in the past, clinging to an idea of inherited wealth that belongs to another century. I'm the one who is building the future, Arthur's and my future, a future where our life's work doesn't just sit in a bank account. It lives and breathes in our community. It has potential they could never have imagined. So what do you think? Some of you might say, I was too harsh, that I should have found a way to compromise with my own son. A parent's love is supposed to be unconditional, after all. But I've learned that while love may be unconditional, trust and respect are not. They have to be earned. And when they are broken, sometimes the only thing you can do is build a fortress to protect what's left. Was it about revenge? I've asked myself that many times, and I've come to believe that it wasn't about revenge until it was. But in the end, it became something so much more important. It became about legacy. It became about honoring the man I loved and about discovering the woman I was meant to be. Did I go too far? Or did Oscar get exactly what he deserved by underestimating the quiet old woman in the corner? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives always mean so much to me. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about finding your strength when you need it most. Thank you for listening.